What is up, my friend? Welcome back. Welcome back to the basement. I am Mikey Henninger. This is Basement Brewed Fantasy Football. Yes, I am still alive, and I apologize for the insanely long hiatus between episode 15, which was July or maybe August, and here we are in episode 16, which is week 7 of the 2022 fantasy football season. You know, it turns out that running a business and being an entrepreneur and being a solopreneur, doing everything yourself, it's tough. It takes a lot of time. There's a lot of hats that you have to wear. There's a lot of things that you need to do that you have no business doing, or you have no idea how to do it. You have no background in it, such as building and maintaining websites and making sure they're functional, which is a huge blind spot of mine, but it's something I have to worry about being a solopreneur. Anyways, I apologize for the long break. I'm going to try and get back into the routine here of a frequent podcast, a frequent YouTube show for you. And without further ado, let's hop right in to I keep calling it week 16. It's episode 16. And in episode 16, I wanted to catch you up on what it is that I'm spending 24 hours a week doing for my 250 plus subscribers. And I'm going to use this Thursday night's football game between the Saints and the Cardinals to kind of help illustrate what that looks like. So for those of you who don't know, I kind of got my start in this fantasy football space by creating a tool that blew up a little bit on Reddit. It's called the lineup setting heat map, or just the heat map for short. And what it is it's a resource that I create. It takes me 24 hours every single week, over 24 hours every single week. And it's something that 250 plus people reference on a weekly basis when they're making really, really critical start-sit decisions. You know, that whole, like, do I start Tom Brady? Do I start Aaron Rodgers? Which guy should I leave on my bench? And a lot of them are using it for setting their DFS lineups, trying to identify some low-cost flyers who will or won't have a really good game, depending on their matchup. And then a lot of my subscribers also use it for player prop betting, which was not the original intent, but if you see this thing and you've used it before, it makes a lot of sense that people would use it for player prop bets. But again, it's something that 250 plus subscribers reference every single week. And what it is basically it's a one-stop shop, and I hate that term, but that's what it is. It's a one-stop shop for basically anything and all the research that you would possibly do in a given week when you're making critical fantasy football decisions. And it's all it's all under one umbrella. It's all under one roof. So I spend 24 plus hours a week writing up every single fantasy football player in every single game, every single week. And that's, we're talking 250 to 300 players every single week, from the, highly known and widely known guys like Jonathan Taylor and Christian McCaffrey, all the way down to some guys that you might not even be thinking about, like Donovan Peoples-Jones, for example. Also in this resource, by the way, something that I've actually I've done to help evolve it a little bit over the last few weeks is at the bottom of it, there's cheat sheets for touchdown regression. So you have a really quick cheat sheet to see who mathematically is likely to score or not score touchdowns in the coming week. You're going to see a cheat sheet for streamers if you need like a rental for bye weeks or injuries and you just need to plug and play somebody at quarterback, tight end, defense, or kicker. And then, of course, by popular demand, I started also entering my own favorite DFS plays right at the bottom of this resource called the heat map. So all of that, all of those cheat sheets, everything, all of those player write-ups, it's all under one resource. You literally click open one thing and it's all right in there for you. This thing is less than $2 a week. And again, 250 plus people are using it when making these critical decisions. Now, for today's episode, I want to use this resource. I want to use this heat map to talk about 4 players in particular from this week's Saints versus Cardinals game, the Thursday night football game, some of which I like, all of which I like, but some of them I would caution that you should temper your expectations based on some matchup items that we'll get into. But we're going to talk about Alvin Kamara, Chris Olave, Kyler Murray, and of course, Deandre Hopkins. So let's start with Alvin Kamara. And actually, before we hop into any players, let's talk about what to expect from the Saints versus Cardinals game. So, again, this is Thursday night football. New Orleans Saints at Arizona Cardinals. Here we have a 45-point over-under, which is neither good nor bad. It's neither high nor low. It's like right in the middle of the slate. And Vegas is expecting this to be a really close contest. There is a 1.5-point spread in favor of the Cardinals. So a narrow 1.5-point spread like that implies that it's going to be a relatively neutral game script for all 60 minutes, meaning there's no need to expect, one team to have to abandon their run, for example, and, emphasize the pass 50-plus times a game. Instead, it should be a pretty balanced game on both sides. It should be business as usual, so to speak, for all players on both teams. Now, the Cardinals are expected to score 23.25 points per Vegas. That is the 11th most on the Week 7 slate, which is a 28-team slate. So they're expected to score the 11th most points out of all 28 teams. The Saints, on the other hand, are expected to score 21.75, which is the 13th fewest. So all in all, both of these teams are hovering right around somewhere in the middle. Should be a good game. Should be a neutral game script. All players should be involved. It should be business as usual. I want to start with Alvin Kamara, and there's reasons to like him this week, and there's reasons to, be a little bit hesitant about him. Granted, you're going to be starting him. There's no situation in which you're benching him, but you might want to temper expectations a little bit. Over the last 2 games specifically, Alvin Kamara has certainly picked it up. He's started to pour some fuel on the fire. He's averaging 21.9 PPR points over the last 2 games, 27 touches, 7.5 targets, 6 catches, and 159 scrimmage yards. Now, fantasy football managers that have Alvin Kamara on their team, they should be rooting for Andy Dalton to continue to start at quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. And as of right now, I'm recording this at 2:27 p.m. on Tuesday the 18th, and as of right now, we still don't know if it's going to be Andy Dalton or Jameis Winston under center. But if you have Kamara on your team, you're rooting for Andy Dalton to continue to start for the New Orleans Saints, because Kamara has racked up 15 targets in the last 2 games with Dalton compared to just 11 targets with Jameis Winston. And catchable targets, which is obviously more important. Now, the bad news for Alvin Kamara coming into Week 7 is that the Arizona Cardinals have been really tough on running backs up to this point in the season. They are holding running backs to the 10th fewest PPR points per game, which is about 20.73. They're holding running backs to the fewest touches, the 5th fewest catches, the 6th fewest rushing yards, and the 4th fewest scrimmage yards. Now, the good news is the Cardinals have allowed the 16th most receiving yards, which we certainly know Alvin Kamara can take advantage of. But they've also allowed the 7th most running back touchdowns at exactly 1 per game. And that's particularly notable for Alvin Kamara because Alvin Kamara has picked up 437 scrimmage yards, but he has not yet scored a touchdown. So I mentioned to you earlier on the episode that at the bottom of the heat map, there is a regression cheat sheet that shows who mathematically is likely or not likely to score a touchdown in the coming weeks. Alvin Kamara finds himself very close to the very top of that positive touchdown regression list with 437 yards and no touchdowns. Mathematically speaking, he should, quote unquote, right? Fantasy football is not that simple, but he should be much closer to 2 touchdowns than the 0 he's currently sitting at. Mathematically speaking, he is a strong bet to score a touchdown sooner than later, and I think there's a good chance that this week is the week that Alvin Kamara scores that touchdown. Ultimately, against the Cardinals, 3 running backs have hit 19 PPR points in 6 games, but no other running back has been able to hit 13 PPR points against the Cardinals this year. So they've been a pretty boom or bust defense. It seems like you have a 50% chance of getting 19 or more PPR points, or you're not even going to hit 13. All in all, I'm treating Alvin Kamara as a low-end RB1, a high-end RB2, and I think his outlook is enhanced by the possibility, or maybe I should call it the likelihood, of him scoring a touchdown here in Week 7. All right, want to focus in on Chris Olave, which is a little bit of a risk for when I'm recording this. Again, it's 2:30 on Tuesday the 18th. There's still a slight possibility that Chris Olave doesn't even play this week. It seems like he will. He should clear concussion protocol. It was kind of a shock he didn't play last week, but it seems likely that he's going to play. Unfortunately, at the time of this writing and this recording, it's entirely unclear if he's going to play, but we also don't know if Michael Thomas is going to play. We don't know if Jarvis Landry is going to play. We don't know if it's going to be Jameis Winston or Andy Dalton at quarterback. So projecting at this stage is a little bit difficult, but we're going to give it a shot anyway. Now, the Saints beat writer Jeff Duncan yesterday, which was on Monday, he did report that he is not expecting Michael Thomas or Jarvis Landry to play this week. And if that's the case, that theoretically frees up 12 to 13 targets that need to find a new home, so to speak. Over his last 4 games, Chris Olave is averaging 17.2 PPR points per game, 9.75 targets per game, 5.5 catches, and 87 receiving yards with 2 touchdowns in the last 4 games. Chris Olave, by the way, found himself on that positive touchdown regression list prior to him scoring those 2 touchdowns. In those 4 games, in his last 4, Olave has a season high of 23.7 PPR points, which he scored in week 3. And he has 3 performances of 13 to 17 PPR points. So he's establishing a really nice floor, somewhere between 13 and 17 PPR points, and we know that there's going to be a little bit of a ceiling there. And he's already flashed at 23.7 PPR points in week 3. Now, he projects as a potential target monster if he plays and Michael Thomas doesn't play, Jarvis Landry doesn't play. And the volume alone, that's a reason to be bullish and be excited about Chris Olave as a wide receiver too. Volume is the name of the game in fantasy football. Volume is king. Now, there are a lot of reasons to feel skeptical about Chris Olave this week. Number one is that there's the possibility he's going to spend the afternoon or the evening in Byron Murphy's shadow coverage. Okay, so if they're going to put their top corner on a rookie, I'm eager to see how he responds to shadow coverage from one of the better performing corners in football right now. Other than that, the Cardinals have been tough on wide receivers all around, with or without Byron Murphy. They're holding opposing wide receivers to the 10th fewest PPR points per game, the 16th fewest catches, the 8th fewest yards, and the 3rd fewest touchdowns. After 6 games, there have only been 2 wide receivers that have been able to hit even just 14 PPR points against the Cardinals, and none of them have hit 19. Okay, so just 2 wide receivers all year have hit 14 PPR points against the Cardinals. None of them were able to hit 19. Okay, so Chris Olave, he's best treated as a wide receiver 2 here coming into week 7 as a potential target monster and a potential target vacuum without Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry, but it's also reasonable to temper expectations if he's going to spend all night dancing with Byron Murphy. All right, let's hop over to the Cardinals side of the ball, talk a little bit about Kyler Murray. So far without DeAndre Hopkins, if you're not aware yet, DeAndre Hopkins is expected to he is going to make his debut this week. His 6-game suspension is over, and it's time for DeAndre Hopkins to make his long-anticipated debut. But in the 6 games that Kyler Murray has played without DeAndre Hopkins this year, he's struggled, but he's been fine. He's averaging 18.3 fantasy points per game, 248.8 passing yards, 38.8 rushing yards, and he has 6 passing touchdowns to 4 interceptions with 2 rushing touchdowns. Kyler has a low this year of 13.36 points, which he quote-unquote scored back in week 3. He has 3 kind of mediocre games between 16 and 19 fantasy points, and then he has 2 high games between 21 and 23 fantasy points. So he's been fine. He's been solid. He hasn't really been that elite quarterback that some people have expected or wanted, but he's been fine. Now, with DeAndre Hopkins coming back, I'm eager to see how that might change things. Reason being, over the last 2 seasons, Kyler Murray has played in 26 fantasy football games with DeAndre Hopkins. And in those games, Kyler Murray averaged 23.3 fantasy points, which is significantly higher than the 18.3 that he's averaging this year so far. In those 26 games, Kyler Murray finished over 20 fantasy points in 65.4% of those games, and he even went over 30 fantasy points in about 27% of those games, which is notable since, like we mentioned before, his high so far this year has been no higher than 23. So there's reason for optimism when thinking about his ceiling and his floor moving forward with DeAndre Hopkins, which, of course, I mean, that's kind of an obvious statement to begin with when you're getting a guy like DeAndre Hopkins back. Now, another reason for positivity or optimism when thinking about Kyler Murray this week is it's fair to wonder if he's due for some positive touchdown regression as well. He has 1,463 passing yards, but he only has 6 passing touchdowns, which mathematically, on average, given his passing yardage totals, he should be much closer to 8 passing touchdowns by now. So he's not too far off, but he's about 2 off the mark of where he should be. So it's fair to wonder if positive touchdown regression is going to catch Kyler Murray as well. Now, as for the matchup, the Saints defense has held, technically they've held quarterbacks to the 16th fewest passing yards this year at 236 per game. But other than that, they've been a pretty friendly matchup for quarterbacks everywhere else. They're allowing the 11th most passing touchdowns at about 1.5 per game. They're allowing the 7th most fantasy points at 18.9 per game. And they're also even allowing 17.8 rushing yards and 0.3 rushing touchdowns per game after Marcus Mariota ran for 72 yards and a touchdown in week 1, and Joe Burrow actually ran for 25 yards and a touchdown last week. And we know Kyler Murray is capable of taking advantage of defenses that are going to let him run all over the place. Now, the Saints have held 3 quarterbacks. They've played 6 games, and they've held half of the quarterbacks. They've held 3 quarterbacks under 13 fantasy points. That list includes Tom Brady, Baker Mayfield, and Kirk Cousins. On the flip side of that, they've also allowed 3 different performances of 21 or more fantasy points, including 2 in the last 2 games. That includes Marcus Mariota, who scored 21.8 points in week 1, Geno Smith, who scored 24 points in week 5, and Joe Burrow, who spanked them for 32.5 just last week in week 6. So over the last 2 weeks, they've given up about 56 fantasy points to quarterbacks. Kyler Murray gets DeAndre Hopkins back. There's a lot of reason to feel optimistic about Kyler Murray this week. And then as for DeAndre Hopkins himself, so Marquis Brown, unfortunately, it looks like he suffered an injury that's going to keep him out for a significant amount of time, possibly even the season. Minimum 6 weeks, it looks like. His absence theoretically frees up about 10.7 targets that theoretically need to find a new home, and I don't think it's going to take long for them to find a new home with DeAndre Hopkins coming back, who would have been the wide receiver 1 even if Marquise Brown was still playing. So in those 26 games that I mentioned that DeAndre Hopkins played with Kyler Murray, Hopkins averaged 17.2 PPR points per game in those 26 games. He was able to score 15 or more PPR points in 53.9% of those games. And he also hit 20. That includes hitting 20 or more PPR points in 42.3% of his games. He has a great matchup against the Saints, who, by the way, don't look like they will have Marshawn Lattimore to chase him around with. And the Saints defense as a whole has allowed the 6th most PPR points, the 8th most catches, the 4th most yards, the 6th most touchdowns, and they have allowed six different 15-plus PPR point games in the last 3 weeks alone. Okay, so 6 different wide receivers have been able to score 15 or more PPR points just in the last 3 games. Right? 2 per game are getting 15 or more PPR points. That includes, by the way, eruptions of 27 or more PPR points in each of the last 3 games. 1 wide receiver in each of the last 3 games has been able to score 27 or more PPR points against these New Orleans Saints. So lots of reasons to love Kyler Murray, lots of reasons to love DeAndre Hopkins. I'm less optimistic about the Saints offense in week 7, but there's still reasons to like Alvin Kamara and Chris Olave and keep them in your lineup, even if you should temper expectations a little bit. So to this point, I've also done everybody in this game. Zach Ertz, Taysom Hill, Eno Benjamin, Rondale Moore, Jameis Winston, Andy Dalton, whoever that's going to be, Marquez, Callaway, Tre'Quan Smith, Juwan Johnson, Mark Ingram, AJ Green. Anybody that you might be thinking about in that game is inside the Week 7 heat map. If you want to check it out, head on over to basementbroodff.com and click Win Your Week. There's going to be a video right at the top. It's less than 3 minutes long. It explains how this thing works. Keep in mind that video does not, it was recorded before the platform evolved to include cheat sheets for regression and streamers and DFS. But the video's there. It should give you an idea of how it works. If you want to give this week a try for free, by the way, shoot me an email at mikey@basementbroodff.com or send me a message on Twitter at bbffmikey. I'm more than happy to share this with you free so you can see what all the hype is about and see if it's something that you want to work into your weekly routine. Just shoot me a message, or even if you just want to come hang out on Twitter at bbffmikey, send me a follow or bbffmikey, send me a follow and I'll be sure to follow you back if you let me know where you came from. And other than that, I hope that you guys have a really good Week 7. Best of luck to everybody moving forward. Hope to hear that there's some 7-0 teams out there after this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. It means more to me than I'll ever be able to put into words. Cheers. This brew's for you.